Thank you so much for that introduction, Ruth. And hi, everyone. My name is Monique Alvik, as Ruth mentioned, and I work at the Norwegian Wine and Spirits Monopoly in Norway. And you might be wondering what on earth is the Norwegian Wine and Spirits Monopoly doing at this type of webinar today. Very shortly to explain, we, along with Systembolaget and Alko in Finland, are sponsoring these sessions because we believe that they address a risk within our supply chains. Now, Vinmonopolet is the sole retailer of all alcohol and spirits in Norway. We are owned by the Norwegian government and report to the social services section of the government. And we sell alcoholic beverages. So if you ever are going to visit Norway and you would like to enjoy a beautiful bottle of wine or maybe some rum, you would have to come to our stores to purchase the product. And mentioning rum, we started actually finding out about risks within our supply chains connected to the rum industry back in 2016 and 17. And La Isla, who will be presenting to you today, at that stage made us aware that working conditions in our supply chains could possibly lead to health risks for those that are harvesting sugarcane. So quite a long way from the rum product that we have on our shelves to the actual harvesting of sugarcane and the production of molasses. Now, as a state-owned company, we have a responsibility not only to those that we sell to, but we also have to those within our supply chain. So we try to figure out how is it that we can assist within our supply chain in sharing knowledge on best practices out there, on what the research says on protecting workers, and then specifically, how do we focus on heat stress, which seems to have quite the harmful effect on the persons working within the field. So our journey started in 2016. And then we connected with Bonsucro and with La Isla in 2018. And in 2019, we started developing these types of webinars. And it's been a great honor to see not only how the field has developed, but also to see how ownership has been taken within the supply chains. But to you who might be new here today, I hope that this is a very interesting and eye-opening experience as to what the research says on how simple interventions can create change. And then also, do know that retailers within Europe are going to be asking questions more about risks within supply chains than ever before. There's a large focus on company responsibility within supply chains. At Vinmonopolet, we report on the Transparency Act, which is a Norwegian law, stating that we don't only need to identify risks in our supply chains, but we also need to address them with mitigating actions. And one of those actions could be the learnings that you receive from this webinar today. So I wish you all the best with regards to the webinar, and I give the word over to our expert panelist. Ilana, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sasha Monique. Thank you, Ruth. Let me just see if I can go ahead and share my screen here. Yikes. Let's see. Yeah, Peter? Good. Yes, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Alana Weiss. I am the Chief Program Officer at La Isla Network. As Sasha Monique said, I've been doing these kinds of webinars with her and Bonsucro for the last 6 years. I tried to update my presentation to reflect the change in to update what we've learned from our new research and to kind of reflect the state of the world today as opposed to 6 years ago when we first got started. And I understand that invited to this webinar specifically were more auditors and people who are interested in understanding ways to evaluate these kinds of interventions. Because when we started this years ago, the concept of protecting manual agricultural workers from heat stress was kind of new, and now 6 years in, a lot of different mills and producers along the supply chain have started implementing these things, which is excellent news, as Sasha Monique said. So trying to incorporate that reality into this presentation. I understand that I am being translated twice from English into Portuguese and Portuguese into Spanish. So if at any point I go too fast or something isn't clear, please let the moderators know in the chat, and I can either visit it at the end or I can try to clarify in the moment. So, La Isla, oh, I think my screen, sorry, my screen has frozen. Are you seeing this slide, Peter? For anybody, or is it only half loaded?
Lana, Global
Sorry?
Data Hub. Yes, and your
Oh,
point.
okay. Sorry,
Yeah,
on my end, it didn't load up. So Isla Network, as the name suggests, is a network of multidisciplinary experts across lots of different fields all around the world. We've started our journey as a community-based organization in Nicaragua. Then we transitioned to a research-based organization. And over the last several years, it stopped sharing my screen. Do you guys still see my screen?
Yes, we're seeing the full graphic. The other just had the first lines of the graphic. Now we have the full view of the graphics. The Global Data Hub.
Okay, but I think I'm no longer sharing. Is that right, Peter?
Yes, Peter is sharing.
Too bad. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't see it anymore. So I'm sorry for the technical difficulty here. I can't see it anymore, so I just need to exit out here. Apologies. It takes my computer a second to register any changes. Okay, I can see again. I just can't see my Zoom. Okay. So over the course of the last few years, we've kind of transitioned into a bridge between research and data and the application of those results to the people who need to hear it. So whether or not that is governments and legal frameworks, to inform regulatory frameworks, employers, the workers themselves, we make sure that the results of all of these hundreds, thousands of data points that we have collected get to be applied in a way that is helpful. Again, from a legal framework, from a applicable framework in terms of how to improve conditions for workers across the supply chain. Our flagship was in Nicaragua and in San Antonio. A lot of the results that I will be presenting today are based on our work there. They are our center of excellence and kind of the proof of concept that these kinds of interventions work and not only improve health, but also improve productivity and provide a pretty substantial return on investment. Next slide, please, Peter. So as a result, we have been publishing quite a bit. We are getting growing recognition from international bodies. These, OSHA, Pan American Health Organization, ILO, United Nations Human Rights Council are a few of the bodies that have relied heavily on our work in their publications in the last year or so. And all right, next slide, Peter. And well, why are we talking about this now? Why is heat stress and protecting workers from heat stress something that we need to do? Well, climate change is here. Heat waves are more frequent, lasting longer and hotter. They are happening in places that hadn't seen heat-related extremes in the past. It is happening all over the world. Next slide, Peter. And according to a report that the ILO put out last year, 2.41 billion workers worldwide are being exposed to excessive heat. That is about 70% of the global workforce. That's a lot. 23 million people are estimated to be injured at work annually due to heat-related illnesses. And that's not including the almost 19,000 deaths per year caused by heat. So in addition to the kind of individual impact that that's having, there is a massive financial impact as well, with an estimated 80 million jobs lost by 2030 due to excessive heat, and financial losses upwards of $2.4 trillion. Next slide, Peter. Another reason that it's important, and I have more reasons why this is important towards the end, but relevant on this Bonsucro webinar is that heat stress mitigation directly contributes to your Principle 2 criteria 2.1 of the Bonsucro production standard. Ruth and I and everybody on the standards revision team worked really hard to make sure that that was in here. And so not only does working on these kinds of interventions contribute to this criteria and the 7 indicators under this 2.1, it's one of the biggest risks identified in sugar. Next slide. So when I'm talking about heat stress, what do I mean? Often people think that I'm just talking about that it's hot outside, and that is a very important part of it. Environmental heat is part of heat stress. But in the course of our conversations, when I am talking about heat stress, I mean the combination of the environmental heat and the internal heat from muscular work or metabolic load. So anybody who's ever exercised knows that when you move your body gets hot. And the combination of that happening with extreme heat from the environment causes our bodies to overheat. Humans are remarkably bad at cooling ourselves down once we get hot. The only kind of adaptation that we have to extreme heat, mitigating it in our body, is resting. We stop moving and we rest. Respiration, breathing heavily, which happens if you've ever exercised. Sweating kind of coats our skin with water, and when a breeze comes, it cools our skin, so that helps us cool down. And then vasodilation, so our blood vessels dilate, they get closer to a skin, so as our skin cools because of the sweating, it cools the blood as it circulates through our body. And that's it. So this combination, the environmental heat and the internal heat from muscular work, means that the greater physical strain, the hotter your body is going to get. In sugar, these guys are working very, very, very hard. It is one of the hardest jobs that we have recorded in the measurement of activities that people do, including extreme athletics, professional sports, marathons, ultra marathons. Sugarcane cutters specifically are at the same level as those guys. And what happens when your body gets so hot? You are at increased risk of a heat stroke. You are increased risk of developing both acute kidney injury, which is just kind of a sudden major event, and chronic kidney disease, which is damage that is caused over time as your kidney function decreases. You are increased risk of all accidents, so not just a heat stress event, a heat stroke in the field, but cuts, burns, crashes, falls. Everything is increased when people are exposed to heat stress for long periods of time. Reduced productivity. You physically cannot produce as much if you are in constant heat stress. And early mortality, either the instant death that can be caused by heat stroke or a slower death that is the result of chronic kidney disease and multi-organ failure. Next slide, please. And if you could just click through so that the whole slide pops up. I think it's 2 clicks. Thank you. So again, the external factors of heat stress are the air temperature and wind speed. That's pretty self-explanatory. The relative humidity, which is the thermal feel. So when you see a weather report and they say it's 26 degrees outside, but it feels like 30, that's because of the humidity. Heavy workload and piece rate. This again is emerging as one of the more proximal causes of heat stress events. Piece rate is getting paid per ton or per area or per work. And when people are paid that way, it incentivizes ignoring your body's signs that you need to take a break. If you are getting paid per ton, then you are going to overexert. You are more likely to overexert yourself to make that extra cash at the expense of your health and well-being. Lack of natural shade and exposed land area. A lot of the places where sugarcane is grown has this gorgeous volcanic soil that is also very dark. As everybody knows who's walked through a parking lot on a hot summer day, dark surfaces absorb solar radiation and then radiate it back out. So it is hotter when there is no shade. Clothing that can be protective or harmful. If you are wearing moisture wick clothing that takes your sweat and externalizes it and allows it to evaporate, that helps keep your body cool. But if you are a pesticide applicator wrapped in kind of plastic impermeable protective gear, that is going to stop the ability of evaporation of your sweat, and it's actually going to make your body hotter. Internal factors include dehydration, again, self-explanatory. Metabolic load, which we talked about, was the amount of energy required to move your body. Health conditions, if you have high blood pressure or low blood pressure, for example, and to cool yourself off, your veins are dilating, that could be an issue. If you already have low blood pressure and your veins dilate, it could cause you to pass out, and it could also put you at higher risk of a more severe consequence. Sex, women are slightly better at regulating temperature than men. Men have more muscle mass in general, so they tend to get hotter when they exercise, when they're working. Women, if certain times of month or if they're pregnant, their temperatures tend to run a little bit hotter. So if you're starting your workday with a higher temperature, then when you're exposed to the environmental heat and you are the metabolic load, the amount of energy it takes to do the work that you need to do, and your body temperature rises, you're already at a higher baseline. So to get to a dangerous level happens quicker. The same with fever. If you go to work and you already have a fever above 38 degrees Celsius, you are already at high risk. You're already hot. And then you're exposed to the environment and you're exercising. So your body is just going to get hotter. It's actually quite dangerous, and you are at very elevated risk for a heat-related event. Next slide, please. So it is not just agriculture. It is not just sugar that's affected here, obviously, but sugar very much is in this world. Next slide. And if you could click through, I believe it's two clicks, Peter. Anywhere we are seeing this combination of high heat, heavy work, and insufficient labor protections, we are seeing illness, injury, and early mortality. So, firefighting, mining, fishing, construction. These are all high-risk places, but obviously agriculture is disproportionately affected because most of the work is manual, most of the work is outdoors, and most of the work happens in high heat. Next slide. The good news is that it is preventable. Heat stress-related events are preventable. We can mitigate the impact on the human body by applying this combination of relatively simple and relatively cheap interventions: cooling, rest, hydration, and sanitation. If these things are done well, they are incredibly effective at keeping people safe and healthy. So when I say scheduled breaks, I mean, I also am including in here the length of a workday and the inclusion of recovery days. So I mentioned briefly earlier that sugarcane cutters are equivalent to extreme athletes. Extreme athletes always have rest and recovery time. Sugarcane workers often are working 7 days a week. And they don't get that recovery, so there's a lot of muscle breakdown. That means that there's particles of muscles in their blood, and that is hitting their kidneys, and it can cause kidney damage. So part of the scheduled breaks means short, reasonable work days and recovery days built into their work schedule. I will talk more in detail about each one of these components in just a moment, but if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to show you how effective a well-implemented intervention can be. And again, we'll go into more details about these results in a minute, but on the right, Site 2, our Center of Excellence at Ingenio San Antonio in Nicaragua, is showing that with rests every hour and a short work day, they stop work at noon for cane cutters, burned cane cutters. And you can see very clearly the green arrows are indicating the rest periods. We are pretty successful at keeping body temperatures below 38 degrees Celsius, which is a fever, and that the incident kidney injury, so that is a decrease in serum creatinine, an indicator of kidney damage, is greater than 0.3 milligrams per deciliter. During an observation period, we were able to reduce that to 1%. Whereas the one on the left, Site 1, that has no workplace interventions, you can see one rest period. That's like a long lunch on a very long day. This operation stopped just before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They had a big percentage of their workday of people working with essentially a fever and incident kidney injury of 21%. So if done well, this really works. Next slide, please. So rest schedule. At Ingenio San Antonio, we developed a rest schedule that was appropriate for different kinds of jobs, because there are field jobs that do not require the same physical exertion as a burned cane cutter or a seed cutter. So we took that into consideration as we designed with them something that was effective to keep people healthy, but allowed people to work in the way that they needed to work to meet production quotas, and allowed people to work. If they followed OSHA guidelines, for example, none of these people would be able to work past 9 a.m., which is not reasonable. So we worked together with Ingenio San Antonio to develop this schedule that protect workers and allowed them to work. In this context, and every place is a little bit different, the cane cutters got rest every hour. You can see that as the day got hotter, their breaks got longer, except for that last one. It's just a 15-minute break because they were done for the day at noon. In Ingenio San Antonio, the workers will sometimes eat small snacks during their longer breaks, and they have their lunch at the end of the day at noon. And other sites, we had to accommodate lunch in the middle of the workday because that's how they prefer to work. And so their breaks looked a little bit different. But we strongly encourage in these really, really high, heavy workloads to end the days early before it gets too hot. Seed cutters, you can see work a couple of extra hours. At Ingenio San Antonio, the policy is that they do the heavy cutting in the morning, and at noon they just bag the seeds that they've cut. So it's it requires less energy, it's less movement. It's an easier task to bag the seeds. And then other field jobs that were lighter workload could also go into 2, and you can see that their rest schedule is reflected accordingly. next slide. Mobile shade tents is the other key component of this intervention. Rest should be in shade. The whole point of the intervention is to cool people's bodies down. So allowing people to be in a place that's cooler than what the environmental temperature is, with the radiant heat, coming down from the sky and then radiating out of the ground. Having shade really makes a difference in quick cooling for workers. We require that there are at least 3 sides, so a roof and 2 sides that go all the way down. They need to be able to shift because the sun obviously is moving across the sky over the course of a day. In the morning, that sun is right at the horizon, so we need to be able to block the sun and actually provide shade. There needs to be enough space for workers to spread out and sit. Seated rest is best. Sitting on the ground is actually requires quite a lot of muscle work. Anybody who has small kids who spends any time on the floor with them knows that it is hard to sit on the ground. So a portable stool helps people relax. We also require in our interventions that the mobile shade tents are close to where people are working. If anybody has spent time in a sugarcane field, it is really hard to walk through a place where there is cut cane lying on the ground. You have to kind of walk over these big mounds or walk long distances around because it's too dangerous to walk over. The whole point of rest and the whole point of having these shade tents is that people aren't exerting any energy, that they are stopping, they're getting their body temperature down, they're getting their heart rate down. And if, in a 10-minute rest period, it takes you 5 minutes to walk to your shade tent, you're not actually resting and you're not going to get the level of decrease in your heart rate or in your temperature that is required. In the shade tents, we also have water refill stations and hydration beverages. That's another reason that it needs to be close to where the workers are. We can go to the next slide because it's talking about access to clean, safe water and electrolyte solutions. The water not only has to be clean, it has to be a cool temperature. Drinking cool water helps cool your body down, and it is also palatable. Nobody likes drinking water that's been left out in plastic containers under a hot sun. So it is easier to hydrate. It is more likely workers will hydrate if the water is tasting good, it's safe and trusted, and is a cool temperature. Electrolyte solutions are very helpful and good. These guys are working hard. They're sweating a lot. Our work emphasizes the importance of hydration with water, but we do recognize that electrolyte solutions are helpful and beneficial and good, and people like them. And it's a good idea to offer them if you are able. Next slide. We are always asked what the recommendation is for water consumption. And for the kind of heat that sugarcane workers are exposed to and the kind of physical exertion, our recommendation is at least 1 liter per hour of water and 1 unit of 250 milliliters of hydration solution per hour. Important to emphasize that you cannot force people to drink. These are just there's a curve and there's amount of hydration that people need is always on the curve. And if you force people to drink too much, that could be dangerous in and of itself. So this is a guide for how much water needs to be in the field. So when you're estimating the reservoirs of water that you need per worker, you estimate 1 liter of water per hour per worker. But then it's up to the individual to decide how much they want to drink, and then health promoters or work captains can encourage this amount. But again, you can't force people because that can bring its own dangers for health. Next slide. I think this one is animated too, Peter. So there should be three tiles. If you can click through to make sure it's full. If we are asking workers to drink that quantity of water in the fields, it is, especially if you have female workers, it is important to have a safe place for people to relieve themselves. This is good practice in business, whether or not we're talking about heat stress. But again, if you are asking people to drink water, you need to provide a safe place for them to relieve themselves. That's safe for them and safe for the environment and safe for the communities that live around the sugarcane fields. So again, next slide. And this is animated to Peter, so if you could click through until it's full. This is a slide that I have showed in previous years to show the difference in the kinds of interventions or the progression of interventions over time. Each color, each one of these is a different place in a different country. The Center of Excellence is Ingenio San Antonio in Nicaragua, and you can see that over the course of the day, most of the workers studied were able to keep their body temperature below 38 degrees. You can clearly see the rest that they took. This is a really well implemented intervention. It's not perfect. We still have 1% IKI, incident kidney injury, and the goal is to have 0. The goal is to have 0 minutes above 38 degrees. But we're really close, and we were happy with this result. If you look at the one all the way to the left, the red one with no intervention, you can see an extremely long workday. You can see no really rests of note except for at around 12:30. There's about a 30-minute rest when people had their lunch. They spent an average of 65 minutes of an entire workday at rest, which is not very much. And 20% of their workday was spent with a fever, with their bodies too hot. Unsurprisingly, in this group, we saw incident kidney injury of 30%. That's really high. And then there was another insufficient, the middle one, the yellow one, was an insufficient intervention. This was a meal that was implemented something on their own to their credit. We're giving it a try. But you can see, especially in the early hours of the day, how hot people got. They spent about 18% of their workday with a fever, and the resulting IKI was 17%. One thing that I like about this slide is, regardless of the effectiveness of the implementation of interventions or the existence of an intervention, you can see very clearly how dangerous those morning hours are. So even though it's cold outside, cooler outside, excuse me, in those early morning hours, once those guys start working and exercising, their body temperature jumps up right away. So one of the most effective things that we did at our Center of Excellence at Ingenio San Antonio was introduce an early morning short rest to interrupt that zoom of body temperature in the cooler hours of the morning. It's counterintuitive. You would think that the cooler temperatures would be protective. But again, it's the combination of ambient temperature and internal temperature. And these guys are working so hard that they got up very quickly to dangerous levels by 8 o'clock in the morning. Next slide. Again, these are steps that seem simple, but they are enormously complicated to implement, and they need to be done well. There needs to be a team that works on it within the operation. It's really a behavioral change. It's not the way that work has been done in these contexts for the 200 years that it's been happening in the Americas, at least, and elsewhere. I don't have a timeline at the tips of my fingers, but people are not accustomed to work with regimented breaks. So it is behavioral change, not just from the workers, it is behavioral change from management, from production, from the agricultural departments. Some examples of where these seemingly kind of straightforward directives have failed was in one place. I had mentioned that overhydration is really dangerous. You can drink so much water that it affects your brain function, and you can die. They were incentivizing people to drink just enormous amounts of water. They had really long work days, and they gave a prize to the worker who drank the most water. And people were drinking like 30 liters of water over the course of a work day, and they stopped, thank goodness, but they did send several workers to the hospital for overhydration. So again, that's one example. Another example is a place that invested quite a bit in these interventions, prolonged the workday to the exact amount of rest breaks. So if they were taking an hour and a half of rest breaks during the day, they extended the workday by an hour and a half. And it pushed these workers into not just the hottest hours of the day, which are dangerous, but really, really long work days with no recovery time for their bodies to recover physically from the day of work. So by the time they were getting home, it was like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, and they were waking up again at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to get to work. And so any benefit of these interventions was erased by that. Then in another country, in another mill, they were so militant about people resting in the shade tents that were not placed correctly. So they were really far away from where the workers were working. And this was actually a place that had pretty good natural shade. Natural shade is the best kind of shade. So they were pulling people out of natural shade and making them march across the fields almost a kilometer to rest tents, and again, to shade tents rather. And again, it was undoing any of the benefit of an intervention like this. These are 3 out of hundreds of examples I could give you of how well-intentioned implementation goes wrong. There was another place that had, they were really into putting in the latrines, but they weren't installed properly. It was basically just like, they didn't dig holes. They just had like a little tarp on the ground with no hole for drainage. Like the whole point of the latrine is that it's something in the ground, and it actually made things really dangerous because there was then human waste just on the ground in an enclosed area instead of people just going in the field, which is also not ideal. Again, 4 examples of good intentions gone wildly wrong if there are not clear indicators or experts helping to do this implementation and support the behavioral change that is required to do these interventions. So again, bearing in mind that our friends who are doing some of the auditing of these programs are on this call, I wanted to give everybody the results of our most recent work. So next slide. These are 4 sites in 4 different countries. The first 3 we observed over 3 harvest periods, 2022 to 2025. You can see that each site had kind of a different level of where they were starting. And then site D, we just looked at for 1 year. So I just wanted to show you what happens over the course of 1 year when there's, because it's the most recent one that we did, and to give you the most up-to-date results. So next slide, please. So this is how we evaluate sites when we go on. Work shift, which again includes the length of the day and the existence of recovery days. 7-day work weeks are not really acceptable. 6-day work weeks are better, but not ideal. I mean, the reality of this kind of seasonal work, I think going less than 6-day work weeks, it's a tough sell. But that there is at least 1 day a week off is something that we evaluate, and that the work days are reasonable. 6 hours is kind of the gold standard. We have seen mills make it work with 8-hour workdays, but again, it requires really good attention to the rest schedule that is developed. The scheduled breaks is what I just mentioned, sufficient hydration that is close to where people are working, that the shade tents are movable and in the places where they need to be, close to where the workers are working, toilets and sinks, or what we've already talked about, and the presence of health promoters. We've actually found that the most successful intervention programs have health promoters on site that are given permission to tell workers what to do. So in the hierarchy of what a work site looks like, that the health promoters are empowered to tell not just the workers, but the work captains what needs to be done, and then can run things up the flagpole if something is not happening that needs to be happening. So we have all of these indicators and then a whole host of other indicators that inform these general indicators, and we rate them with this kind of stoplight scheme, red meaning that they're not existent, up to green, which is optimal. And you can see, you know, site A, B, and C had the full support of our team over the course of our work with them. And it's hard. There was improvement every year, but this kind of change to do things the way that it needs to be done takes time. But you can see every mill that we looked at did improve over the course of the time that we were with them. Next slide. Another very important indicator if you were evaluating these programs is looking at health. So this requires blood samples, but we looked at declining rates of incident kidney injury. So that again is a indicator in the blood that is flagging that the kidney is in distress. It's a decrease in kidney function, an increase in serum creatinine, which is the indicator that we measure in the blood. So even in places that had imperfect application of their interventions, saw a huge decline in kidney injuries just by having some of the program. So again, the goal is to have 0 incident kidney injuries, but site A, that started at a really high level. 30% of their workers the first year when we just did observation had incident kidney injury. By their 3rd year, they were down to 8.3%. The same at site B, you saw a decline in kidney damage. Site C, a big jump. And site D, which was just an observation year with, you know, we had given them the guidance and it was the first year that they were trying to implement. This is a place that had massive problems and the implementation was uneven over the course of the harvest. I just wanted to show what happens that in the first half, so from baseline before they start working to the first half of the harvest, you saw 16.7% of the workers have an incident kidney injury. From the baseline through the second half of the harvest, from the first half of the harvest to the second half of the harvest, that jumped to 29.6%. And then from baseline to the very end of the harvest, it was 48.5% of the people studied had an IKI. So it is cumulative. It gets worse, you know, and all of the places where there is sugar harvest, it gets hotter as the season progresses, and it's cumulative. So when we're talking about good implementation, it's not just some of the time. Like, it needs to be good implementation every single day, because you can have a heat-related event, you can have a kidney injury in one day, you can have a kidney injury in one morning. So good implementation that's consistent is the key to success of protecting worker health. Next slide. I chose to take site D as the place that I was going to just show you in more detail what their results were, knowing that like it was their first year. I fully anticipate that they will continue to improve. There was a lot of issues in implementation. Even with the implementation and the overall negative health impacts, you can really see a difference in the groups. It's a big mill. We looked at people with intervention, with their new intervention, and without their intervention. And you can see on the left, without an intervention, people's bodies got really hot. They didn't really take breaks. They got really hot really early and stayed hot. Whereas with the intervention, flawed as it may be, they were able to keep their body temperatures lower throughout the day. At the end of the day, you could see people kind of jumped up above 38 degrees, and that has to do with the piece rate that I was telling you about, that they needed to make their quota. So the end of the day was coming and people started working harder and their body temperatures rose. I am aware of the time, so I kind of want to zoom through here so that there's plenty of time for you guys to ask me questions. Next slide. This is again just showing the health impacts. This is heart rate of the different levels of intervention. But I think we can zoom through that so that there's time for questions. Next slide, please, Peter. Acclimatization is a super important thing for us to talk about. I'm not going to have time to talk about it today, but the first 2 weeks of a harvest period is the most dangerous in terms of heat stress and health. A 2-week acclimatization period, or 10 days of the work week acclimatization period, is essential to keep people healthy as they ease back into their work. Can talk more about that in questions if you want more information on that. Next slide, please. We did really robust work with we're in all of the mills where we have programs, and these kinds of recommendations, developing job-specific and regional interventions. Every context is a little different. Every culture is a little different. The way that people relate to rest and food and water is going to be different. Distances traveled is different. So making sure that interventions meet the reality of the specific context is essential. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. As I mentioned before, health promoters in the fields daily is kind of the single most important indicator of success. Creating a robust internal monitoring and evaluation plan with indicators to check is essential. It is also essential for sustainability, because if you invest all of this money into this intervention and you're not checking to make sure it's being done correctly, it may be a loss. If you're not doing it right, it could be making things worse, or it could just be making no impact at all. So robust internal monitoring and evaluation indicators are essential for success. Making health the responsibility of other departments, of agricultural and harvest departments specifically, is helpful, because they often have to just focus on production and not on humans. But linking production to humans, and that people are more productive if they're healthy, makes sense and needs to be taught and developed in these other departments. I've already talked about behavioral change that's required, including from the leadership. If this is not indicated that this is a priority of any operation, it won't happen. So from the worker all the way up to the CEO and the boardroom, health needs to be a priority for these kinds of interventions to work. Very quickly, because I do want to give plenty of time for questions. This graph, next slide, the graph is just showing that with a well-implemented intervention, productivity actually increases. This is just human physiology. People who are healthy and rested produce better. we can go into more detail, but I want to fly through these slides so that there's plenty of time. Next slide, please. We did a return of investment analysis at Ingenio San Antonio and found that it took a while, but by the end of several years, but at the end of 2 years, they started seeing a return on investment. At the end of 5 years, it was almost a 60% return on investment, which is enormous. And you know, $1.60 return for every dollar invested is really remarkable. We can skip the next slide. Back to the Bonsucro standards of why these kinds of things are important. The next slide is talking about obligations for companies under the CSDDD, which is, you know, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive out of Europe. This is going to change the way that Europe does business with the world. I think Sasha mentioned that Sasha Monique mentioned that in Norway, they already have some legislature that is requiring folks to look at their supply chain. And that's Europe-wide as this is being incorporated into the legal framework there. Why it's important. And then the next slide is just how these kinds of things support the UN sustainability goals. And I'm flying through to the last slide to say thank you and to allow you to have an opportunity to ask me some questions.